Lovejoy provide the reading, and then Dean will be here to deliver his message. Thank you.
Morning.
Good morning.
This is a reading from Tomorrow's God. Schools, with punitive and coercive practices, have without a doubt been the primary means of transferring limited and therefore inaccurate views to your offspring, and you have actually created, on purpose, learning institutions that teach children about life from a singular and restricted point of view. Little or nothing would be taught of the history of the rest of the world, nor is there much, if any, exposure to the point of view of other cultures. For this reason, schools such as this could best be described as tools of indoctrination. Memorization is a key tool in most schools in the world today, private or public. That is because it is the objective of most schools to teach humanity's offspring to duplicate the lives of their parents. The best way to ensure this outcome is to have children memorize the same things their parents memorized. Then they will come from the same knowledge base, hold the same understandings, embrace the same beliefs, think the same thoughts, and exhibit the same behaviors. Because those who embrace tomorrow's God will want to assist humanity in releasing its false beliefs about God and about life, the emphasis in future schools will not be on getting children to duplicate, but to create. It will be about showing young people who they really are. It will be about opening them to Creator within. It will be about allowing them to see and to believe in themselves as the source of their experience and the authority over their lives. It will be about returning them to their own inner wisdom and encouraging them to fashion their own innermost truth.
Thank you, Jeff. When that first started off, I thought, oh, this is a little somber. And I'm going to continue with that for a moment. But thank you, Jeff. And I'm glad that they see or hear the way you responded.
Can you just stop for a second? There's a dog that's in a car outside, if anybody has it. It's a little tiny dog with the window open only this much, and the sun is shining brightly into that car.
Is it in my one of the red cars? I'll go out and check on my dog.
Just open the window a little bit more because the dog is very unhappy.
Or put it in the shade.
I'm happy because I'm at home and she's out there.
Okay, bring her in and check. I'll check my dogs too.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean.
You're very, very welcome. It's kind of our inside joke about the volume of my voice and standing much closer to the microphone. You hear me so well. I'm tempted to hesitate a little so Jean returns, or until Jean returns, but on the other hand, I feel the need to follow up on what I can. I'm so grateful that Jeff does these readings for me and comments. Even when I write a summary for Salary and Judy to introduce what I'm going to talk about, I wrote, we've learned lots of things that restrict our creativity. We've learned to conform in order to feel loved and accepted. We're way too worried about what everyone else thinks. We're afraid to make mistakes. It's time to break this pattern. So I want to make some comments about that, and if one is interested, I wrote about this extensively in my book, Doctor's Orders Go Fishing. But very importantly, I think we need to come to terms with change. Even Sally did that to me today. And the things do change. You know, only yesterday there was the coronation. And it reminded me so much of how this is the way things are, how they have been, the way they should be. And I was glad in a way, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, seriously, but I found it all rather comical. With the dress, the appearances, all the formality and so forth. In fact, in a much more back-to-earth experience I only had this past week, my wife and I were visiting her sister, and we used to live there. Her sister still does, but it's a very large gated community, Lake Wildwood in Penn Valley, California. And they have a beautiful golf course, major. And Shelley's sister shared that the manager of the clubhouse had now come up with these new rules that if you were to dine, for example, in the clubhouse, you could not chew your food with your mouth open. You could not put your elbows on the table. This was a 40-year-old man saying that this is the way you must conduct yourself in the golf clubhouse. Now, again, that's a rather novel way to jump from the coronation to, but the idea, again, that things should always be the same. And so I liked in the reading where it mentioned the idea, but what about all the different cultures and cultural differences? And which way is right? There's a remarkable arrogance that goes along with the idea that someone knows the right way to be. And I really was enjoying, as I was preparing this talk, thinking about, even in my lifetime, when we were very young and what you wore to school. And if you think about what you did, sometimes it was a very practical matter. We lived in a housing project, and pretty much you wore blue jeans. And when those blue jeans wore and got holes, it's not like today, talk about a change, we celebrate wearing these torn up jeans, but we would patch them. And those jeans would last a long time. And it was just, of course you would patch them and wear them. But the school decided that you shouldn't be able to wear patched jeans to school. That's exactly what the mother said. And the schools backed off, as you might imagine. It just didn't make a lot of sense, did it? But if you think about when you went to school, that chances are that, I don't want to call it a code, but there was this unwritten, unspoken code about you did dress a certain way. It was all about fitting in. And so you very quickly learn how to be, what to think, the music to like, and how to be cool, and so forth. And what happens, not only as Jeff mentioned in terms of our school system, but there's a very real dynamic. I know more perhaps as a psychologist that when we're little, our minds function very literally. We don't have the use of abstract reasoning or much reasoning at all, honestly. And so when we are reprimanded, maybe for the finest reasons, like a baby is crawling and headed toward a light socket or electrical outlet, and so we would be very quick and clear about, no, you can't do that, right? And depending on how alarmed we were and how that was presented to the child, what's the baby's response though? Oh, thank you for telling me I should. The child does not like being told you can't do something, right? But here's what happens, is the child doesn't know the difference between the behavior and being reprimanded for the behavior and taking it personally. And so, again, even when we do things in a very well-meaning way, we're taking it in such a way that there are very definite things to do that are okay and very definite things to do that are not okay. So what does this do to our creativity? So we get off to a really, really bad start, honestly. Not only does this go on for, quite a number of years, say 5 years, when you're at home and dealing with mom and dad in particular. And, like in my case, if you don't mind my saying that, my dad was really strict, and there was really only one way to do anything. I mean it, and that was his way. If I said no to my father, I quickly learned I did that twice. I got slapped. So I say, you're not stupid. You're going to catch on about how to be and what's right and what's wrong. And again, this idea of feeling not only that you fit in, but feeling loved. And so chances are, if you've had children, and you will remember at some point, probably, a child actually coming to you and asking, do you still love me? So just to make my point about this is real, and this is how it feels. So, again, now back to the idea of then what has happened that has made this so difficult. We were talking about something earlier today about how difficult it is to change. And I guess I want to say that it's more difficult, I think, than you realize. I even remember my mom, this is many years ago, when she was getting on in her years, and we were just sitting down, and out of nowhere she just kind of said, you know the thing I regret most in my life? And if you could think about that for a moment, what's the thing you regret most in your life? Always being too concerned about what everybody else thinks. And so unfortunately, we really are guided that way more than I think you realize. And it's not a very freeing thought, is it? No, in the end, it really is so much about freedom and feeling it is really okay to be free to be me. And whatever that means. Now, things have changed so dramatically in so many ways when I think about just like wearing blue jeans or whatever. But again, just in growing up and the changes, do you remember when women started to wear pants instead of skirts and dresses? Right, the world was falling apart. And my mom was rather formal, so I remember even when I went off to college, and I was near downtown Cleveland in Ohio, and I walked downtown, and people were wearing T-shirts downtown. I know. So it is kind of novel, because I like clothing. I just own clothing stores, actually. That, what people wear and why. And so in my first little clothing store, it was in 1969. People wear blue jeans, but the bottoms, I'm not exaggerating, and some of you I know will remember, were as wide as 40 inches. I know. They weren't flares. They were bell bottoms. I know. And so, but what was the public response initially to the idea of wearing bell bottoms? I know, and long hair. I remember, actually, I trained to be a buyer in a major department store in the men's department. And we were always supposed to be the fashion leader, So I was kind of pleased when I was actually asked to work with this particular garment company and to choose some flares for the department. But they, of course, were meant for cruise wear. It's again, and when you think about what people wear on the golf course, the older idea of cruise ships, it's like you wouldn't be caught dead in that stuff, but somehow it's totally appropriate on the golf course or on the cruise ship. Anyhow, so I'm glad I can kind of treat this a little lightly, but there is nothing cool about feeling judged or criticized. And again, I'll go back to that idea of arrogance. Who in the world thinks they know it all? And not only what's best for them, but what's best for everybody else. I'm thinking about even in visiting with my wife's sister that her sons who have children who are now our great nieces and nephews. And so it's kind of fun to see the children and how children be children. But I was thinking about the idea of when they draw or, you know, whatever, and we can enjoy the creativity and something, you go, what in the world is that? But you wouldn't say that. But of course, there's always the idea of you have to draw between the lines. People's faces aren't purple. Do you know what I mean? But we would actually do that, and it's unfortunate to say the least. And then I made a note about gender issues. And I have to admit, even my adjustment or change to the idea of transgender issues and someone wanting to be called they, or it's just so different, it's awkward and uncomfortable. But again, where do we draw that line and say this is right or this isn't right, rather than respecting our individual differences, and in the end, of course, encouraging our uniqueness. You were not raised to be unique. That's the last thing you were raised to be. It was all about conforming to some particular made-up code about what is right and what is wrong. Not that there aren't real social norms that make sense, and learning to live together, work together. I even wrote down this image of Archie Bunker. Well, but there are a lot of Archie Bunkers, which is a little scary. But again, coming back to this idea of, so who in the world thinks they know? And where is this rule book anyway? You know, but so then when you think about it, here we are gathered, with this spiritual intent and the idea, well, thank God there's a Bible. But when you think about all of the different religions and belief systems, so whether it's the Quran or any other, so which one is right? And what I find often is that people, without even having never read that other book or know really much about that system, like we were talking earlier about Buddhism, so how in the world could you possibly be rationally critical if you've never even read the darn book? So the importance of tolerance, to say the least. So now what I want to get into and dwell a little more on the idea of creativity and what restricts it also, but also what we can do indeed to harness and really develop our creativity. But I want to do a little experiment, and I need someone to help me. I need one person to volunteer to help me in my little experiment today. Xana? Okay. So Xana, I just want to make it clear for all of us, we have not discussed this beforehand. You have no idea what's coming. Okay.
I love it.
Okay. So this will make, after I hope, if this goes well, you'll appreciate it. But after Xana,
And if it doesn't go well?
It'll be my fault.
Okay.
thank you. How gracious. Okay, so again, I'm going to ask you to follow along with me very logically. No trick to this, just follow along. But very importantly, when I ask you for a response, I want your very first thought. No second guessing, just the very first thing that comes to your mind. This is not embarrassing, it's not weird. It's just I want to make a point.
Okay.
And you're going to help me do it. Okay, so please follow again with me. You, as well, you can follow along. But we're going to ask Xana for her response. Okay, so 1 and 1 are 2. 2 and 2 are 4. 4 and 4 are 8.
Don't put too high.
8, okay. 8 and 8 are, quick, name a vegetable. Name a vegetable.
Zucchini.
Okay, so she screwed it up. All right, but I'm going to tell you what I did and how you can do this yourself. So when I was, let me back up for a moment. When you put the mind in a state of dissonance in a way, we're following along this very logical progression, and then you're asked to respond, the mind wants to grab onto something. And very commonly what it does, it grabs onto what is going on around at the moment. So as I'm doing this, I'm going 1 carrot and 1 carrot, or 2 carrots, 2 carrots and 2 carrots, until then, most commonly, people would actually say carrot.
Really?
Really, really.
Actually, carrot was in my head.
Thank you. Anyhow.
I'm unique.
Yes, you are.
Really
So, all right, so here's the point I want to make, is that if I were to ask you where your thoughts come from, no trick question, where do your thoughts come from? Thin air, did you say? Well, the idea is it's a very logical process. You draw on your experience and you try to reason something, right? But here's a demonstration, at least potentially, where you can appreciate that your thoughts may not be your own at all. We even know in terms of work, say, testing or experimentation with a lie detector, which supposedly, measures his physical response, and you can tell, right? But if someone is within a certain proximity projecting another thought strongly, it will absolutely influence the lie detector. With biofeedback, part of my real interest in how the mind affects the body, we know that your thoughts literally do affect a physical response. We can measure that. Well, there was interesting research done where if you have naive subjects, they don't know what's going to be tested, what's going on, and you have another group that's also naive, but they're going to sit and imagine the other person relaxed or tense, either way, and they're hooked up to a GSR or something that's going to measure the physical response, that very definitely they can influence your physical response with thought. So, then it comes down to, be the discipline of being kind or thoughtful or considerate, respectful, because it literally will affect the conduct of that person or the physical responses of that person. What I really want to jump to now, though, is it much of a stretch to think that if even I could or anyone could influence the thoughts of another, what about the probability of a concept like God? Because I'm so enamored with the Conversations with God books and knowing how God is always talking to us, certainly that's so clear in the message in those books, is so why couldn't we, and ideally purposefully, open to the influence, the thoughts, the suggestions of the benevolent force, however you understand what God is, to open to that. And you want to talk about then the potential for creativity? What are God's limitations as such? And does God care or choose that you would be limited in any way or delight in your uniqueness? I remember, goes back a while too, but do you remember when the Catholic Church accepted Galileo back into the fold? He had been actually ostracized from the church because he believed that as he observed with a telescope, that the Earth was not the center of the universe. But many years later, there was an official announcement from the Vatican that there is a role for science. But, of course, the way to determine truth is divine revelation. What do you think about that? So it's interesting, isn't it, when reflecting back on schools and how we determine what's true. How many of you ever wrote as an answer to one of your exams, God told me, and then this is the answer? I even joke as a psychologist, we have psychiatric diagnoses for people who think they talk to God or God talks to them, which again is an interesting dilemma. And how we don't really learn to value it except in a lovely opportunity like we meet on Sundays and appreciate the enthusiasm and wonder that you shared earlier about what happens when we get together in this very special time and utopian atmosphere that's presented here. So, oh, somebody mentioned too about, oh, that was you, Tovia, about something's right in front of us. We didn't even know where it was. But it made me think about another thing. How many of you really were raised Catholic in Catholic elementary school? Okay, do you remember when you were taught that there is a saint who will help you find lost things? Do you remember who that saint is? And he did it is right. That's the point I want to make. Remember, that was St. Anthony. And so, if for those of you who weren't exposed to the Catholic Church in this way, is that in fact you were taught that if you lost something, you could ask St. Anthony to help you find it. And in fact, very commonly, and especially because you were children, and I mean, well, you didn't know any better, or maybe there really is a saint that can help you do that. But in fact, you were able to find stuff. Wow. Well, so where did that creativity, where did that something come from? So is it a St. Anthony, or it doesn't matter? What if there is a universal mind, a universal intelligence, a benevolent, whatever you want to call it, that you can absolutely access at any time? So however you were brought up in terms of your religion or spiritual beliefs, whoever heard other than you can connect with a God force as such, and guess what? God answers prayers. Anybody taught differently? Did somebody say yes? Well, but my point is to remind you, and what a wonderful then opportunity we have each Sunday, to be reminded that you are part of this universal mind. And that you are perfectly loved and cared for, perfectly safe and loved, no matter how you dress. I don't know. I'm not having a little fun with this, but it's such a serious matter. And I think I was going to give you some science stuff, but I think I'll back away from that. I know I've told you this story before, but I'm going to share it with you again. You know, I worked in medical centers, cancer centers specifically, for a long time. And, you know, of course, when you're dealing with cancer, death and dying is a very real issue. And, but also I was very interested in engaging physicians to interact with patients and families and share their stories and experiences and their perspective. And oh, okay. Can they exit out that way? Okay. So anyhow, one of the most unique stories and experiences I had when this one physician said how he had worked with a young man for many years who had a substance abuse problem, an addiction, and he was beginning to make headway after time, but then they lost contact for whatever reason. But he said that he would really wonder from time to time, however, whatever happened to this boy. And then at some point later, he ran into the boy's mother and was very curious to ask about her son and how he was doing. And the mother said, you know, I really appreciate you, and you're asking because the boy really, really felt very appreciative of what you did and how much you helped him. And the doctor shared, you know, that he had seen him about 2 weeks ago, and that's what really prompted us now why he was so glad that here's the mom. And she says, you know, that's really interesting. Again, he really appreciated how you helped. But he died 1 month ago. So let me remind you of this timeline. This doctor saw him 2 weeks ago, but he died 1 month ago. Now, how does that happen? So if you know about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and others who've really looked into death and dying, that actually was not uncommon. Dr. Kubler-Ross talked often about how she would see her deceased patients, and that brought up a lot of discussion and a lot of controversy, if you can imagine. But anyhow, when we were back in our offices where the doctors all were one day soon after this talk, and there was this doctor who said how he'd seen his dead patients, so we were talking about that. And another physician overheard us and he said, I've seen numbers of my dead patients, which I thought was intriguing as well. But then another physician who I knew very well said, I hope I never see any of my dead patients. And I said, don't worry, you never will. Now, why? Why would I have said that? Because it's true. If you're closed to it, guess what? So it's like the idea, I hope this makes sense. Let's say we're tuning in a radio to a station. Okay, and you're trying to get 95.3, but you're on 98.7. It can't happen. So if you really think about it, thought is an energy. God is an energy. And if you want to tune in, you've got to tune into the right frequency. The idea of being truly open to truth. So, however, we learned early on, very definitely, about what's right and wrong and what can and can't be. Remember even the old Henry Ford saying, if you think you can or if you think you can't, you're right. So, obviously, our attitude, our desires, our openness, our intention are key. But appreciate that you indeed may have some resistance or this hurdle to get over around, but that can't possibly be. So I was having fun reviewing this little book to help make this point very strongly. Does anyone recognize the name Walter Russell? Maybe is an intelligent man, creative person who ever lived. Is that cool? So you may want to look into it, but this is a sweet little book about the man who tapped the secrets of the universe, written by Glenn Clark. So rather than take the time to read all of this to you, because it is such a sweet, inspiring story, Dr. Russell was self-taught and expert in anything he chose to do. It didn't matter. So whether he was an artist, literally as a painter, or a sculptor, and that's how he became really well known, because what happened was that they were going to honor the life of Thomas Edison. And there was a sculptor engaged to do this very special sculpture for this special honoring ceremony and so forth, but he backed out at the last minute. So Walter Russell says, well, I'll sculpt it. Now I want to tell you, we're talking about the highest level of people and, the very special ceremony, and this guy is even admitted, what in the world am I thinking that I can just take this on? But he said he knew. He said, I knew in advance from long experience in trying to achieve the unachievable that meditation and communion between myself and the universal self was the only way to achieve this impossibility. And so he went on. And he was recognized at the highest levels in the best ways for everything he was able to achieve. It didn't even matter to him what it was, if he set his mind to it. It's just this wonderful living example of what's possible. And so again, it's a reminder and an encouragement then to you how we can do the impossible. I do want to mention a very practical thing that I've taught before about what I call a mental phone call. So just like the way I was attempting to influence Xana, is you can, honest to goodness, communicate with people mentally, and it is remarkably effective, even though it may not appear to work so well today. So I just want to tell you this very practical thing you can do that's real. And forgive me for pointing to you in the moment and your child, your young child. Children are so open. And when raising children, it isn't always so easy and comfortable. I call parenting on-the-job training. And you just like, oh my God, what was I thinking? And don't have any idea in the world how I'm going to get through this, is you can honestly speak to another person mentally. Now, the way I was taught and the way it really believes is that you honor that individual rather than you should do it my way. Don't you know? Is you start with I love you no matter what you do. So it's like making a mental phone call but nothing said out loud. So again, whomever you want to contact, it can be a policeman about to give you a speeding ticket. You start talking to this, I'm serious about this. So I love you no matter what you do, but, and then you speak from your heart. This is what I think would be in your best interest, and then whatever that might be. And sometimes, of course, we could never say that out loud for whatever reason, but you can come from your heart silently. And then you end at, I love you no matter what you do. You're in for a lovely surprise, the influence you can have when you're coming from love and coming from your heart. And by planting that suggestion, whether it's performance in school, you can have so much influence. Everything, such a practical matter of, newborns, and they, keep you up all night. You can talk to that child mentally and say, I will absolutely be there if you need me. But unless you really need me, you're going to sleep in. We're all going to sleep in, and we're all going to be much happier and nicer to be with. There's such a very practical thing as how you can influence someone with your own thought, especially if you're coming from it in a very loving way. I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, so I'm feeling like maybe I should back away. But I do want to add one point, and that is around my meditation classes, which are the first Tuesday of every month at 5:15. It's a wonderful way to make this connection with whether we call it a universal mind or universal intelligence or God or your inner muse. How many artists have really said that they didn't write or didn't compose something, they just heard it and wrote it down. We're talking people like Mozart and Beethoven talking about how they just heard these symphonies and wrote them down. You can make the same connection like anyone else, even if it's someone as special as a Thomas Edison or even Billy Joel. I remember particularly the singer-songwriter Billy Joel said he has never written a song he hasn't first heard in his dreams. Never. And it reminds me, even now, I'm actually taking part in a dream class back in Yachats. And so I'm actually paying extra attention to my dreams now. And just the wonderful image message that came through symbols, but the way I was able to understand it, the message was, make time in your schedule for loving yourself. So I just think it's just as a sweet thing to do that you can do for yourself. So whether you're meeting on Tuesdays with the Zen group, or please join me on Tuesdays, the first Tuesday of each month, and we practice developing or accessing a part of you that can come up with very practical suggestions. I won't share much in detail, but just this past Tuesday, because past Tuesday was meditation class, was someone was going to be in charge of organizing their high school reunion. Which was years and years and years. And we went inside to see, well, what could he do that would help him in organizing this and making a success? And we came up with all kinds of wonderful ideas that came from, and then you label it whatever you like. So you can access, again, such a special source and resource. And I wish you well in doing it. Okay, so now our meditation. Jeff, do you want to play or not? We don't have to do it. Good. So this exercise is going to be connecting with your inner muse. So if you will, please make yourself comfortable. And then close your eyes. as a way to help you focus and narrow your attention so that you limit your reasoning, logical mind in a way to facilitate the access to this universal mind and intelligence. And today we'll call it your inner muse. So now, as a way to help you focus and also begin to exercise this intuitive part of who you are, I want you to let a color come into your awareness that represents your inner muse. Take your time. Simply let this color come into your awareness. And then, in a very creative, fun way, I want you to let this color take a form. Be totally open to whatever form it takes. Take your time. And then as you become aware of the color and the form, I want you to have just this lovely conversation. And if you have a question that you would like information about, or anything you can do to help develop your creativity, please take your time now and do that. Thank you very much. And now slowly, if you will, please, begin to bring your awareness back to your outer consciousness, becoming more aware and alert, but remaining perfectly relaxed and comfortable, and only feeling good. And if any of you would like to discuss this further, of course, after this service, I'll be in the library, and we can talk more about this. Thank you.